Sometimes the deepest wounds in love don't come from loud betrayals, but from quiet prisons, when someone claims to love you, but slowly erases you in the name of protection. Welcome to Broken Truth, where love meets lies, and every story reveals the pain behind the smile. Some people betray not by leaving, but by holding on too tightly, confusing control with care. They micromanage your choices, isolate you from your world, and call it love, but real love allows freedom, while control fears it. When someone hasn't healed their own insecurity, they often turn love into a mirror where only their reflection is allowed. And when you finally start to reclaim your space, they feel threatened and betray you with silence, punishment, or abandonment. Not because you failed them, but because you refuse to shrink for them anymore. She used to think love meant protection, until protection started looking like locked doors, monitored texts, and dreams put on hold. He didn't shout, he whispered limitations. "It's for your good," he'd say. "You'll thank me later." In the beginning, it felt like being chosen, but slowly, she forgot how to choose for herself. The betrayal didn't come in a kiss shared with someone else. It came in the way he slowly erased her and called it love. Let the story begin from the day she realized she was more lonely sitting beside him than being alone. Let her feel the confusion of a love that felt like a cage wrapped in silk. Let her question if she ever truly knew him, or if she only knew the version of herself he allowed. Write this story in a minimum of 2,000 words. Follow the theme, reflect the hook, and use tone. Soft, painful, honest. Style, poetic, slow-paced, deep one-liners, mood, sad, heavy, thoughtful. The story should be written in one go, not in parts, and should not include any titles or headings. Keep the flow seamless and uninterrupted. She didn't notice. The silence at first, not the kind that comes after arguments, but the kind that settles in when you no longer recognize your own voice. There was a time she laughed freely, loudly, carelessly. Now her laughter came in polite echoes, measured and appropriate. Her joy filtered through his comfort. He never raised a hand. He raised expectations. She had once told him she wanted to travel. He smiled and said, "You can't just chase the sky forever. You need roots." It sounded poetic, grounded, sensible. She believed him. Until she woke up one morning and realized her wings had quietly fallen off. Every decision became a discussion, then a negotiation, then a dismissal. What would you wear that for? Why does she need to know so much about our life? Don't post that. It looks desperate. She thought he was protecting her from the world, but he was only building walls around her light, because her light cast shadows on his control. Love isn't supposed to feel like hiding, but that's what she did. She hid herself in "I'm fine, and it's not a big deal, and maybe next year." She hid her desires behind soft smiles. She kept making herself smaller, quieter, more agreeable, until one day she looked in the mirror and couldn't remember what her own eyes used to dream. They were sitting on the couch, legs touching, but hearts miles apart. The TV was on, the air conditioner hummed. He scrolled through his phone. She sat still, watching the way the light flickered on the ceiling. She said, "Do you think I've changed?" He didn't look up. "Changed how?" She waited. "I don't know, just changed." He shrugged. "I guess you're more stable now, more grounded." Stable, grounded, she wanted to scream. But even her anger had been trained into silence. That night, when he fell asleep beside her, peacefully, like a man who never noticed storms, she sat on the edge of the bed and cried, not for what he did, but for what she allowed. She remembered how she used to write poetry late into the night, how she used to dance barefoot in the kitchen, how she used to answer calls without fear of questions. She remembered how she used to love herself before someone made her believe she was too much to be loved whole. He didn't cheat, he didn't yell, he didn't hit, he just dimmed her. He folded her spirit into neat little boxes labeled reasonable and safe, and every time she peeked out, he reminded her that the world was too dangerous, that people couldn't be trusted, that he was all she needed. But what happens when the only person who claims to love you is the one who teaches you to fear yourself? She stayed because it was easier to explain than to leave. But love isn't supposed to feel like explanation. It's supposed to feel like expansion. One morning, she woke before him. The sky was still blue-black. The birds had not begun. The world was still. She sat by the window and watched the city breathe, and suddenly, she remembered the girl who once dreamed of writing a book, of standing by the ocean, of feeling wind without permission. She whispered her name aloud, just her name, and it sounded foreign, but beautiful. That was the moment, not a grand fight, not a revelation, just a name remembered by lips that hadn't spoken it with pride in years. She didn't pack that morning. She didn't cry. She just began. She started answering questions honestly. Started saying no, even when his eyebrows raised. Started buying her own coffee, her own books, her own time at first. He was confused, then annoyed, then dismissive. "You're acting strange lately." She smiled. "Maybe I'm acting real." He didn't like that. Control rarely does. She began. Spending time alone. He accused her of drifting. She said, "Maybe I'm returning to herself." He called it selfish. She called it survival. He said, "I gave you everything," she said. "You gave me a smaller version of myself and told me to be grateful." He laughed, or maybe she did. It's hard to tell when someone leaves long before their body does. The betrayal wasn't an affair. It was in the way he conditioned her to forget that she mattered without him. She walked into her own life like it was a country she once fled from, foreign, wounded, but still hers. She visited old cafes, bought sunflowers, called her sister without glancing over her shoulder, wrote a poem and didn't hide it. She grieved, not him, but the years she spent making herself likable instead of honest. It hurt, healing always does, but one evening, sitting in that cafe, with a pen in her hand and a stranger smiling at her without expectation, she felt peace. Not the kind he promised, but the kind she found. And for the first time in years, she didn't ask for permission to feel alive. She just did. She closed the door behind her and waited for the silence to break her. It didn't. There was no dramatic sobbing. No collapse in the hallway, just her, just air, just space that no longer belonged to someone else's version of her. The weight didn't lift immediately. It shifted, moved from her chest to her hands, now free but trembling. Because walking away from what suffocated you also means walking away from what you convinced yourself was love. The streets felt unfamiliar, even though she had walked them before, but this time, she wasn't rushing home to explain herself. She carried guilt like an old scarf, wrapped around her neck tightly, almost comforting because she'd worn it for so long. She asked herself 1,000 times, was it really that bad? Was I too sensitive? Did I give up too easily? Memory is cruel that way. It edits the bruises and romanticizes the chains. It whispers, he didn't mean it, and at least he stayed. But staying is not the same as loving. She remembered how she used to say sorry for things she didn't do just to avoid tension, how her body would tense when his tone shifted, how she learned to read his moods like weather reports, forecasting storms to keep herself safe. That wasn't love, that was survival, still on lonely nights. She missed the version of him who smiled at her across dinner tables, before his concern became criticism, before his touch became control. She missed the illusion it took weeks before. She could sleep without replaying old conversations, before she stopped checking her phone, wondering if he missed her or just missed managing her. And then one morning, a small shift. She ordered coffee without second-guessing her choice, sat by the window and read a book without guilt. She wasn't healing loudly. She wasn't chasing a glow up or posting proof. She was just breathing. Without asking for permission, she found herself crying in a bookstore once, not because she was sad, but because she found a journal and realized she could write in it without someone asking. Why do you waste time on that? She was no longer wasting time. She was reclaiming it. She started setting boundaries. At first, her voice trembled, but it didn't crack. Some people called her distant now. Others said she'd changed. But for the first time, she wasn't bending over backwards to correct their perception. She wasn't here to be understood by those who only loved her when she was quiet. She was here to remember her voice, to speak it, to sing it, even if softly. Some days were still heavy. Some nights, she still reached across the bed and felt absence. Like a weight, but even that was better than shrinking beside someone who called it care. One evening, she passed by a mirror and caught her own reflection. Really saw it. Not the eyes dimmed by compromise, not the shoulders slumped by pleasing, but a woman standing, still healing, still questioning, but standing, she whispered, "I see you now." And that was enough, because healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like a woman walking out the door and never going back, not to a person, but to the version of herself that forgot she was already whole. And this time, when she chose herself, no one had to lose for her to win. She was not being selfish. She was finally being free.